Okay, so we are here again with Alec K. Redfearn from Alec K. Redfearn and the Eyesores, and continuing our conversation and kind of getting right back into your early experiences as a child, eating nightshade berries, and and then moving into your magical life. So, do you want to kind of just reiterate the berries and then move into like the next phase of maturity, like maybe like how that leads you into like, adolescence? And I'm also really curious if you can describe the berries, the color, and the plants, and any details like that too.
Well, I don't actually remember any of this, 'cause it all happened like at that point when, you know, when I'm like right on the edge of memory. But I do know that I do know that the berries are like a bright red. I actually need to, let me see if I can try and pull up a photo of them and see if it triggers any nightshade berries.
Yeah, I love those edge of memories. I've thought about that a lot. Like if you can think about your earliest memory and then just try to think about the memory before that, it's this kind of like before state that's like really bizarre, where those are the types of memories where some of them your parents are like, how do you remember that? You were a baby. And then other ones are like, they'll be like, that never happened. Yeah. What are you talking about? You know?
Yeah, and then you're wondering, you know, which life am I remembering here? You know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, basically, so you know, like just to quickly reiterate, I when I was you know 3 or 4 years old, I can't remember exactly. I'll have to ask my mother. My next door neighbor Donna, who is my first real friend, she and I used to just sort of run around, you know, having, you know, toddler adventures, you know, running around the yard. And it was the 70s. It was the early 70s. So it was, you know, there wasn't the sort of helicopter parenting that it's popular now. So parents would just send us off to kind of, you know, to have our adventures. And, apparently I discovered some very, very attractive red berries that I told my friend Donna, hey, look, these are jelly beans from Bugs Bunny. And she didn't buy it. But I ate the berries and apparently went into some kind of 3-day death trance. Basically, where my mother was describing, like, you know, bringing me to the hospital and just watching the heart monitor just go so slow and just and just getting totally freaked out. But and I basically ended up having periodic hallucinations for the next few years. That, you know, and this is the kind of thing I didn't really talk to anybody about at the time because I didn't really know what to say. You know, but I also think that I grew up in a fairly Catholic family, and we kind of grew up believing in sort of that sort of, you know, Catholic mysticism. My grandmother was a charismatic, grandmother and aunt were both charismatic, you know, part of the charismatic movement, which if you're not familiar is sort of like it's a little bit of a mystical approach. It's sort of taking these almost kind of evangelical techniques like speaking in tongues and levitating and stuff like that. So they were really deep, and my father was a Eucharistic minister for the Catholic Church, still is actually. He still gives out communion. So, you know, that I came from this very religious family, and you know, as a result, grew up with that sort of kind of cloak of mysticism that with that specifically Irish Catholic flavor, you know, and and also kind of growing up in the woods, you know, like you know, in the kind of wooded area, hanging out in the woods all the time. You know, you always just in being young, just remember seeing these old trees, you know, and just thinking that the trees were alive and the trees were talking to me. And, you know, I remember like one of the first things when I discovered LSD later as a teenager is that, you know, I'd know it was coming on when the trees would start beckoning to me. Kind of, they became sort of communicative, and that was, you know, when I knew when it was getting going. So, you know, like that with, you know, with that sort of atmosphere and, you know, like with this sort of like the entheogenic experience with the, well, I guess I don't know if it's technically entheogenic or just sort of near-death experience of eating the nightshade berries, I would see hallucinations like what I described earlier as neon dragons flying across the walls of my room at night. So fast forward to, I went through my teenage years, and my friends and I running around out in those woods, and occasionally seeing ghosts, wondering about whether this tree had kidnapped, or my friend's little sister. We thought this tree had kidnapped his sister at one point. Just the kind of things you think when you're young, and so there was always that, and then I ended up going to Catholic school for high school. I went to Bishop Feehan in North Attleboro, Mass, and that was sort of what shook me out of my Christian faith pretty quick.
Yeah.
I shed my Christian faith like within about a year of that. It's like, God, if these people are so fucking miserable, then why are they what are they getting out of this?
I know.
Got a lot of doubt.
That's really crazy. Like, our childhoods sound, at least from that description, are really, really similar. I pretty much agreed with everything you said. Like growing up Catholic, like kind of living this like in the woods with other kids, like little rascals reality with no parents, like, and then that like kind of like tree mysticism, and then like I didn't go to Catholic high school, but I went to I had to go to CCD, and like
we did too,
and then that kind of just like how Catholicism provides a mystical orientation to the world, but then when you confront the actual established church, you're like, wait a minute, this is completely different than what I've like gotten through what I've absorbed through like my parents and my upbringing,
and what I understand,
right.
So
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Your understanding of spirituality and like how you frame the world, and then you finally hit the structure, and you're like, it's like you just bump up against it, and you're like, whoa, that's like you do a rebound,
For sure.
Right. Well, what's interesting is like my view of nuns. Like when I was little, I would just thought nuns were like these mythical creatures. Because I didn't actually spend any time around nuns until I was in high school. But before I went, I thought they were these beatific, sort of angelic beings. Who were brides of Jesus. So when I actually interacted with nuns and they were angry and bitter and very human,
right.
It was a real letdown. It's just like, man, I figured they'd be more like my grandmother, who was sort of beatific all the time. She was always smiling. She was just always kind of glowing. She was just one of those people. Yeah. And I guess that, the humanity kind of got in the way.
I've kind of like, I've thought about that recently,
but
in that they're like almost like they're like the Saturn element of the structure, that they're like the old crone that's very strict, and like, they're the bones of the whole thing are in there. And even though like, like in Catholicism, like you don't have to like what the priest tells you to do and what the nuns tell you to do is just like, there as a kind of like as part of the purification process. Like, they just like they're there just to perform the ritual and make sure the community's continually pure. So they are like rigid and dry like a broom, like they scourge you constantly, even though like they know that you're going to still go out there and do whatever you're going to do, but we like have been going to mass mostly on like the Catholic calendar. If there was a church that we like closer, but we live rural, so we have to like get out there in the world to go to mass. But I brought Bonnie, and as we're getting back used to a couple of years ago going to mass again, Bonnie didn't grow up Catholic. I did, and she was like, I don't know if I should be here. Like, I'm not, I don't have that Catholic upbringing. Like, maybe am I Catholic? Am I not Catholic? I was like, well, whatever. You're married to a Catholic. It's fine.
Like, both my grandparents.
Right.
My parents went to Catholic school.
Yeah. And so we're there at mass. It's like, I didn't really jive with the priest. He was like had more of a kind of like evangelical style, less like than like the Italian Catholic like just chanting style that I was used to, like. But anyway,
right, that kind of slight detachment of the Catholic priest.
Yeah, it's just they're not supposed to. It's like they're not supposed to put. They're just there to put on the show, right? Like, and then
right.
So then we we get up there for communion and we're about to drink the holy blood, and the nun has it, and she just looks, Bonnie's ahead of me in line, just looks at her, and what did she say? She
said, "Are you a Catholic?" And it was just like that movie Don't Look Now.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I just
right.
was filled with this fear.
Yeah.
And I just had to get out of there.
And I was next, and so I knew, I didn't hear what she said, but I knew something had happened, and I go up in front of her, and she's like shaking with anger and all white and holding the holy blood.
Yeah.
And she has
a little black kerchief over her head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting to receive it, and I'm like, oh wait, no, something just went wrong, and I just like kept walking. But like,
oh, that's funny.
That's like the moment where I like realized that like I loved how harsh she was, like, and that's where like Catholicism is like a whole tarot reading of the universe for you to just kind of interpret and experience and play with. It's like it's not like it's not an experience that only it supports you and like invites you in and is nice. It presents you like all the good and all the bad, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Like the in some ways, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm feeling like comfortable enough in my development as a human being to be able to return to the Catholic stuff without feeling like immediate revulsion. You know, like that sort of like built-in revulsion that sort of got kind of embedded in my teenage years. And nowadays, especially as magic sort of as a sort of magic community in general is moving more into folk magic, moving into working with like the Catholic saints, the way like, you know, and even if it's in the sort of slightly skewed, slightly you know, like syncretic kind of way of working with saints, you know, as a sort of you know, like viewing them less of a specifically Catholic thing and viewing them more as archetypal, you know, archetypal sort of beings that have other connections to other traditions, and they create these sort of interesting kaleidoscopic beings as a result.
Kaleidoscopic is a great descriptive word for it.
Yeah, I sort of think, right, like when you think of sort of transparent layers that sort of that crisscross each other, and yeah, it's definitely been definitely like inspired me to want to study the saints again, even if it's just, you know, by way of Santeria, or, you know, like by way of sort of things that are sort of only peripherally Catholic, you know.
Yeah.
Seeing it more of them as a means than an end, rather.
I think
go
ahead.
In the mass, you know, the Catholic mass it's an act of theurgy. It's the, you know, the turning. It's the transformation. It's the transmogrification. Is that the word? Or, no, what's the word for
transubstantiation?
Transubstantiation. That's it. I was thinking of Timothy Archer, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
like the Mooger,
but yeah, getting back
the Mooger Fooger of the of the host, you know.
Right, the Mooger Fooger of the host, right? The what do you call it? I lost it. I was thinking 4-quadrant multiplier. What's the simpler term for 4-quadrant multiplier? The ring modulation.
The ring modulation of the host.
Yeah. Yeah, and thinking of synthesis as a Kabbalistic concept is something I can get into later. But just sort of getting into continuing with the magical trajectory, going through childhood. You know, when I was at FIAN, I started getting into D&D. You know, as you do when you're a 14-year-old with, you know, that's sort of a weird kid and not surrounded by a bunch of, you know, not one of the popular kids, you know.
That's right.
And I liked all the demonology stuff and all the sort of occult aspects of it. So I decided I wanted to do a book report on Satanism. You know, that was my cover basically for wanting to safely research occult stuff without, you know, having anybody ask too many questions about it. So
and get credit for it.
Right, exactly. I figured it was a two-edged sword, or it would be like some kind of to be additional benefits. But yeah, so I discovered that's when I discovered like Magic in Theory and Practice, the Crowley book, which they had a copy of at the North Attleboro Library. And I remember, hearing that Aleister Crowley is this evil, like the most evil man in the world. And I remember reading the introduction to that book, which is about the only part I understood at the time. I remember thinking, this is actually kind of upbeat. It actually sounds kind of strangely positive, compared to like everything I'd heard about him. And I think people sort of forget. I think people sort of forget that it's a solar religion. That Thelema is kind of a solar approach, and that it is this kind of heroic, upbeat thing. But that planted some seeds, and obviously entheogenic drugs planted seeds. And I think like over the course of my 20s, I started becoming very nihilistic and hitting the drugs pretty hard. And when I got to the point where I was not going to be able to continue doing that in my sort of late 20s around the Saturn return, I started thinking like, I started kind of doing I went to rehab. I lived in a sober house in Attleboro, Mass, with a bunch of ex-cons. That was pretty fun. Ex-alcoholics, ex-cons, people would tell us the craziest stories about, that's a whole other story. But when I had a friend who was just getting into, was doing teacher training for Kundalini Yoga, the like Yogi Bhajan school of yoga, which is focused more on sort of breathing and chanting and sort of, rather than the sort of traditional hatha poses. There's some of that, but it's not as big a focus. It's more about like doing these crazy sort of diaphragmatic exercises, these things with doing these really crazy things with your diaphragm, just like moving your organs around and stuff like that. It's almost got a tantric kind of vibe to it. The general scene surrounding that yoga style was a little culty, and I was a little put off by it, but I continued doing the yoga on my own, and it made some huge changes to me emotionally. I mean, I was going through some pretty crazy paranoia and insecurity after quitting the drugs. I think like for a couple of years I started believing that people were going to climb in my windows and butcher me in my sleep and stuff like that, and so I would sleep with with weapons next to the bed and stuff like that. And it was just pure paranoia. It was just the sort of last of the drugs sort of like being kind of working their way out of my system, I guess. And so so that was sort of the next phase, was kind of the Kundalini yoga and getting into chanting every day. That became sort of like the inroad to what eventually became sort of the magic, working more with ritual magic. Came a few years, sort of at the end of my 30s, I started kind of really digging into that. When I had another sort of, I had sort of been kind of off drugs for a while, and then I started kind of getting a little out of control of the drugs again. So I said, well, I need a spiritual angle, and I kind of feel like the yoga is cool, but I want to go deeper. I want to do something that's, I don't know, I wanted to look into some of the Western esoteric stuff that was in the air at the time. I feel like there was so many people talking about tarot. There was a lot of that just in the air, and it really resonated with me. It's still in ways that sort of like the seeds that were planted when, in my teenage years, I feel like it really started to resurface then. Mm-hmm. So basically, ended up, I had a friend who was an OTO initiator, so I got in touch with him, and he was like, yeah, come on down, we'll do the, so I ended up doing Minerval and first degree initiations in Philly with that group down there at the Lisa's Oasis, and and then kind of did the Crowley thing for a year or two, and then sort of in recent, after that I was like, all right, that's cool, but it's not completely where I want to go. It's not quite. I feel like there's something about it that's still not completely. It was like a gateway drug basically for me, sort of. the thing that sort of led me into, all right, this is where I get in, and I'm grateful for it, and I still think they run a pretty interesting organization, and that they are generally a good, well-meaning group of people who are trying to do the right thing with their little cult-like organization. It's just that they are trying not to be too toxic about it. It's not like they're depriving people of their money or anything like that. So I had a generally positive experience, but found that I wanted to go in a different direction philosophically and magically, and that's what sort of led me to Spare. Spare was kind of the next point of obsession. The Austin Osman Spare, the use of sigils, atavistic resurgence, or the atavistic resurgence, the idea of kind of becoming. But what really appealed to me is that it was so personal. That it's like really just like what he did was really just dipping right directly into the subconscious, without any systems in place necessarily. It just being like very specific and very personal, which is kind of it's about where I'm at now. It's still kind of working with sigils, working with trying to find ways to kind of encode all of it in music, and using the set of tools I have already, rather than trying to, I don't know, work with a system that's unfamiliar. Work with the stuff that's already at my fingertips.
Yeah, that makes me think of a bunch of different things that I was considering when we had been emailing before recording, like like going back to like kind of I'm not going to like go all the way back. We don't have to go back there, but being like, oh, how to incorporate Catholicism again into our lives at this point in our life is kind of like being able to juggle multiple paradigms at once, like kind of without a problem, just being like, oh, that's fine.
Oh, I think you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
Let me plug. That's all right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah,
Okay.
It just dropped out for a second there. Let me plug my phone in and see if that helps.
Okay.
My phone is a little bit running low, so if I hit the battery, hang on, it's the USB thing. It never goes in on the first time. That's the rule. It's the USB rule of thumb.
Totally. I definitely noticed that.
Firewire too. Hang on, I actually have to look at this thing. Where is it? There we go. Okay. It's that satisfying beep. Okay, so what were you saying here?
That like how we had spoken earlier about like how do we reincorporate Catholicism into our lives, like, and I think it has a lot to do with like, I think the main thing that makes it click is that our ancestors were Catholic, so in communication with them, that's just like the language that they're gonna understand, and that as we like because we have completely incongruent other threads going through our lives, that once we incorporate that Catholicism, it's like juggling multiple paradigms at once, kind of like that kaleidoscopic kind of concept that you mentioned, that you're like, oh, these can just like go on top of each other, and that if that's not something that that Spare had done himself, it's at least like what happened with his ideas, that like where chaos magic went is just like, oh, you can fully believe in this one paradigm temporarily just to use it if you want. They're operable, and that you see that over the course of your story that you were describing too. Like there's like regular childhood reality, and then there's Catholicism, and then there's like the dragons that you see on the walls of your room because of the entheogens, and they're just these overlapping like kind of moving paradigms. And then talking about the heroic Thelema as a heroic religion made me think of like when you're in the sober house, that you're at that part of the hero's journey where you're nihilistic and diving into like drug addiction, and even hearing like you're down in the underworld hearing stories of like the people that like got like slammed down into there, and then
right
and then rising
and
back
in prison is and I feel like prison is sort of like it's like the most material underworld there is.
Totally. Yeah.
It is like Tartarus. It's the
yeah it's definitely a reflection of Tartarus on Earth. And it's interesting what Spare, I've been looking back into Spare because we know now that he had some of the later grimoires, the like Bibliothèque Blue grimoires probably, like, and that he had been drawing on them, and it's unclear, whether or not he like if he did those processes, or if he was just inspired by them. But it could be a case of someone who co-authored a magical system through working with spirits, and that might not be on
Right.
the record. But you see, there was just like published, Joseph Peterson just translated a new grimoire called it's like the short version is The Secrets of Solomon. And it's
okay.
It's an ancestor.
He's the one who did the is he the one who did the Honorius?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard some interviews with him. He seems like a really smart dude.
Yeah. Jake says it's his favorite grimoire historian, but it's the Secrets of Solomon is like a ancestor of the Grimorium Verum. And so you see stuff in there that you're like, oh, whoa, this is from the 1600s, but it has some of the hierarchy, and it has most of the techniques and a lot of the sigils from the...
Some of the what? Sorry.
A lot of the seals and sigils from the Verum. And one of the things that is mentioned in it is to, like, after you do an operation, to, like, just forget about it, which I've never noticed anywhere else in a grimoire, but that's clear, like...
It's so sigil magic.
Yeah, so Osmond Spare, where you're like, oh, wow, like he maybe had come up with, like, his ideas of using sigils from working with some of this material,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's certainly not unthinkable to think that he worked with kind of grimoire type of models, and what he does is very, very much in line with that. So it totally makes sense that there's a connection. Whether and I guess so. The question is whether it's a literal connection or whether it's a what do you call it? It's sort of a more of just a commonality of technique or something like that. But it does sort of seem like he was drawing on that.
But I love that you can use that engagement with spirits or whatever you're engaging with, and then bring it back to that personal level that he brought it to. And I was thinking about that with, like, wondering in your kind of path of, like, combining magic and music, which is also present in the Secrets of Solomon, which really impressed me, is that, like, Jake's theories of, like, the Goetic tradition coming from Orphism, that in the Secrets of Solomon, they also mention went during the evocations of groaning and sighing and using a lyre, and I was like, oh wow, so like magic and music belong together from the root, and what you're doing with modular stuff and looking at the sigil on the cover of your new record, like it could even be like a circuit pathway, and then what you could do with, like, engaging with different spirits and different kind of, like, powers, like, and sigilizing them into sound,
Yeah, that's true. And it's funny, one of the things working with modular is because you're connecting all these things with cables, you're sort of forming these sigils anyway. It's, they're like these sigils that are just formed out of crossed wires, out of these. And I thought about one of the things I was thinking about when I first got into modular was thinking of it as a sort of sigilizing with cables, sigilizing with wires and connections, and sort of definitely, like, one of the things that I wanted to do in the future is sort of as an approach of trying to meld the world of the sort of magic and modular, I guess. One of the next projects I want to do is some kind of attempt at working with, like, trying to synthesize some of these seals and see if I can kind of use the information from the seals and kind of translate that into sort of into patches, basically using even if it's not like the literal visual representation of it, just trying to find a good sort of translation system, either using concepts or using, like, the literal visual approach of, this line connects to this line, therefore this cable should connect to this, connection, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, that's what's brewing probably next in the coming year or so. Is what I'm really hoping to do, is to create a sort of ritual space with the sound, and probably be something more ambient. Possibly working with a quadraphonic system, working with 4 speakers, so that there can be a speaker at each sort of in each direction, each of the cardinal directions, and it can create sort of sound moving. Either like backwards, like either Widdershins or Diasil, basically, like either trying to create sort of spirals of energy that way, trying to pull things in that way. I'm not sure how clear all of this is, but
like I said,
it's
you definitely just blew my mind. We have like a
okay, good.
We have a quadraphonic reel-to-reel that I bought accidentally, thinking
sweet.
it was a 4-track, and trying to figure out like how to make it work more like a 4-track, but I was like, oh yeah, right, we can just record quadraphonic in line with the 4 kings,
Right, yeah, you can totally. It's definitely something that I feel like is like especially for there's a traveling situation, like like the Rock and Roll Club being so kind of connected with the 2-speaker PA system probably wouldn't be the best context, but like house shows, house shows that are sort of smaller audiences and they can be more intimate. I feel like it would be perfect for doing some sort of ritual performance that way. So that's in the cards in the future.
No, I think that's really amazing, and I think like ideas like that are really, really valuable right now in that like gentrification, and probably like social media is involved too, but mostly gentrification is really like made it impossible for us to continue our like whole culture that we've been into since we were kids. That's growing out of industrial collapse. That was like our fertile ground, and we just don't have it anymore. So be like, oh, we need to kind of go beyond the audience performer on stage dynamic, because we just don't have the space readily available anymore, so just even these like small ideas like, oh, quadraphonic, like because that I was just praising your innovation of quadraphonic to work with the cardinal directions as we lose like readily available performance spaces to host our subculture, that like we have to start rethinking like how we interface with space in general.
Oh, absolutely, and I mean, I think that the whole role of music in society is at a bit of a crossroads. Anyhow, I kind of feel like the traditional rock and roll model just is sort of antiquated at this point, or starting to feel antiquated. But at the same time, it's not like there's like it's not that it's dying. It just needs to become become what the next thing is. And I think you're right. I think gentrification plays a big part in sort of deciding where we, artists are always sort of, refugees of gentrification to some extent or other, or, we're also, we're also sort of the people that usually are the reconnaissance. They usually send us in first.
Totally.
Let us deal with all the poverty and misery, and then
right, totally, yeah.
We're the grunt.
Yeah, we're the grunts. Yeah, or like I guess what they call the people who dig the trenches. I think this comes from like the Russian front, is the sappers. They were the ones who would like do the digging work and the kind of like setting the foxholes.
We came in to build the railroads, and they bring the trains in.
I think that process is kind of finished playing out, and you can see that in like just no one really can figure out where to go anymore because the entire world is too expensive to live in. So like, it's bringing it back to the music culture. It's like, we need to like stop trying to continue to operate the way we always operated, just in a different space, like another like crack that we can like kind of fill and start thinking about how we can operate completely differently,
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like playing all these new models, and it's interesting to see where. I mean, I imagine places like Maine, where you guys are at, are, I feel like the scene that's up there of artists and weirdos and people who are interested in magic and occult stuff have all kind of settled in that area. Yeah, I mean, you guys are a little bit spread out, but it does seem like you guys are sort of an outpost, a sort of a new base of people. I mean, I don't know how much longer Providence is going to be feasible for us, so I don't know what we're going to do. Fortunately, we have a situation here where we have very generous landlords who really love us, and who are also like, people that, have a history of being into magic and stuff like that. So they lead more sort of conventional lives now, but they still admire that aspect of things, and they're into art and stuff like that. So long story short, they've cut us a serious break on rent, and they like renting to artists. So, but at the same time, like, will this place be around forever? I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Providence has always been home to me for 22 years, no longer. I moved here in '89, so quite a while. My entire adult life has been spent here, so I feel loath to move, but at the same time, I feel like I'm going to get priced out of here, and I sort of wonder if the climate's going to push me out of here eventually too. Like, the changes in climate are going to become more and more unbearable, and that's when we think about like heading north.
Yeah. Yeah, we wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people ended up here, as it's like we're pretty much here because everywhere was too hot for us,
or too expensive,
or too expensive. Yeah, that combination, too hot, too expensive.
Yeah,
but yeah, like
right.
As far as culturally, we're gonna all be pushed or flood into where we're gonna be brought to, but it's like starting to pay attention to like how do we operate differently. Like, I love the ideas of like using your musical equipment as like an inspiriting fetish, and as like what you articulate with it being like manifest, like even thinking of it as an AI, like if there's some sort of like modular self sound generating kind of oscillation going on, that if that's related to such and such spirit because they showed me this sigil and then that's how I arrange my cables, that like you actually can like bring it into the room on the carrier signal of that sound, and then we can all work in a space instead of it being a show. Like, we're all in a space together that's like has quadraphonic directionality, and that like when you do that, we're all kind of just in an interaction situation, and it doesn't have to be such a forced performative kind of like it's like this is performance art of that, like it's the real thing,
Right. Well, I always thought it was interesting, like what Suzanne is doing with her like kind of tarot interpretation, performative tarot interpretations, is some of the more interesting use of kind of like ritual stuff that's very personal, but at the same time is working with an archetype. It feels very ritualistic, but doesn't feel forced in any way. It doesn't feel like she's putting on a mask or something. It feels very natural. So I really admire what she's doing with it. And I mean, I feel like that's a good model too, because she's doing a lot of like sort of smaller space things that are like, when you're doing a house show or a smaller space like that, it can be a more immersive performance. It sort of just lends itself to that. So that's an important thing. And like what you were saying about sort of like the modular AI thing, a big thing that's happening in modular synth stuff is creating generative music, which is, like it basically is just kind of creating algorithms that will just sort of automatically make music, like just make music, giving a set of parameters and just letting it sort of go, like semi-random, or like sort of controlled randomization. And that I feel like is so magical in and unto itself, that with just the right kind of push could be sort of, it could be a way of sigilizing, a way of sort of making a seal that, can bring in just these spirits, these energies, these things that you were talking about. Peter Biebergall, do you know who he is? He wrote that book, it was called Season of the Witch, How the Occult Saved Rock and Roll.
No, I don't think so.
It's book about just sort of occultism and rock music. It came out like 2 years ago, but his new book is called Strange Frequencies, and it's specifically about the spiritualist movement and about the sort of spiritualist technology and how some of it like involved a certain kind of strange machinery.
Yeah.
And I sort of wonder if I haven't. I mean, the book's not out till October technically, but I'm kind of curious to see where he goes with that topic, because I feel like that could be a really interesting source of inspiration for this next period,
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle. Like anything that stresses mediumship, and then like a kind of like but mediumship and the technology of it, is definitely it's definitely perfect right now. I was thinking about too when you were saying like about the self-generation of sound, that it almost is that someone needs to, or even a group of people need to kind of like put together a kind of grimoire of sound manifestation, like, and spirit interaction, that kind of like through their experiments that they got results from, that you're like, oh, if this much self-generated sound in like kind of modulating or collaborating with this much composed sound is like the right recipe of like this much evocation and this much feedback or something.
Yeah.
It could be really like interesting to like for a bunch of people to kind of be prompted by experiments that they all try and then get back together and say like, oh, what worked, and then kind of put together a format around people could.
Yeah, that totally makes yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's just there's just a lot of potential there. And I think that like kind of trying to create some kind of writing or some kind of grimoire, some kind of at least documentation that sort of like that catalogs the successes and failures of what happens. It could be a way to kind of create a whole system.
Okay, so we were talking about systematizing a kind of like sound, spirit, magic kind of engagement, which definitely sounds like an exciting thing. And like as you were saying, there's a lot of potential right now, and I really do think that like the as we see like musical culture
definitely
is having a really hard time like with at this moment, which is kind of good to drag it over the coals to kind of figure out what we're going to do next with it, whereas like magical publishing is having an absolute renaissance. They're not really like, it's kind of the perfect, like the information culture and the disembodiment from like needing like a place for it to operate. It can operate just like all over the infosphere, like has made magical publishing boom. And it really seems like it's actually perfect. And you see that rhythm in history, cultural history anyway, of like the arts dive and then are re-inspired and reinformed by actual magical experience. And so I think it's good. I was bummed for years that music wasn't going where I wanted it to, but now I'm actually like, this is great. Like the next thing is going to be pretty exciting.
Well, music is, like you said, it's at a crossroads, and at this point, like a lot of the sort of the traditional reasons why people play music, the typical, like, to get signed, to get famous, those just aren't an option anymore.
Right.
It's the only way to do that is to be manufactured from within. It seems like, like there's nobody getting discovered now. I feel like people are either manufactured or not famous. But at the same time, that sort of, I feel like, is that's thin the herd in some ways. It's sort of it's gotten rid of a lot of the opportunists and sort of left a core group of dedicated people that are not in it for bullshitty reasons, that aren't just like, it's not just a fashion show. That it's like, because the sort of that sort of like material reward is less palpable. So I think a lot of people, who normally would have gravitated towards rock music back in like the 90s when I was kind of coming up, at that time it just seemed like everyone was scrambling to try to get a record contract. And I feel like nowadays those people would just, I don't know, be making apps or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, or being chefs or something.
Yeah, which is, and not that there's anything wrong with making apps,
Yeah,
or even becoming a successful musician for that matter. It's just that, like, that's all well and good. It's just not really, like, obviously we've people like us have taken a slightly, thornier path. It's going to be fraught with problems, but at the same time, there's something really satisfying about it. So,
Yeah, that's a really good
go.
That I keep trying to tell students. I've been teaching classes like Magical Foundation and Grimoire classes, and telling students that, like, engaging in witchcraft actually makes your life harder rather than easier.
Oh yeah,
it makes it better, but it makes it harder.
Right. Well, it's the same thing with anything like witchcraft or modular synthesis too. Is like it's going to limit, like, the deeper you get into it, the more you're going to alienate everyone.
Right. Yeah.
Just because you just end up talking about it nonstop, and not everybody is. It's really with no pun intended, it's really for the initiated.
Yeah.
Sort of. It's that crowd. But anyways, you were going to say, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I think that kind of sums it up to a degree, at least that conversation. Okay. And I'd like to see with music, like, us take that kind of Orphic approach, like, that we're doing our magic and our music kind of simultaneously, but not in the way of making a show out of it. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what you get into next. And
you're breaking up again, Christy. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Let me try plugging my phone in again, see if that helps. Are we there?
Yeah. Hello.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Well, yeah, we should probably just say goodbye, so we can kind of get past these technical difficulties. But we definitely want to get you again, and have a longer conversation about some of the stuff that we missed.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah. And maybe post-tour we can hear about...
Yeah, that's actually a good opportunity.
Yeah, about what happened out there.
Yeah. And you all inspired me to try to seek out some, try to do a little pilgrimaging while we're over there. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, totally. It's like you can't go to Thebes on this trip, but you can do the next best thing, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much for talking to us, and we definitely want to continue the conversation again.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.